Hello, today's lesson is fractions and decimals on a number line, and it's section 6.3 in the Big Ideas Math textbook. And the essential question is, how can you use a number line to compare positive and negative fractions and decimals? So let's go ahead and get started on the warm-up that's on your notes. Now, what I'm asking you to do is scale the number lines according to the number that's written. So for instance, this says I want you to scale the number lines with halves. But I already have a number on the number line, so you need to use my number and figure out, I'm going to the left, right? This is the left side of the number line, which has negative numbers. So if you're starting at 0 and you're going to scale using a half, each of these lines represents 1/2, right? So if I skip, that's a half. This is -1. And if I skip 1.5, this is -2. -2.5, this would be -3. 3.5, this would be -4. So that's, you know how I said I like at least 5 numbers on a number line, including the 0. There's 5 numbers, but I could do one more and put a -5. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video and try these on your own. I'm just going to tell you that the 20ths, right, the smaller the number of pieces, the harder it's going to be. So pause the video, see if you can scale the number lines according to the scale that's been asked for each of the, let's see, there's 6 to do. Okay, so if I see thirds, right, this is what I'm thinking, that I have to do thirds. So I need 3 lines. So 1, 2, oh, the -1 is already there. So this would be 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. If I skip to there, that's where my -2 is. 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. That's where my -3 is. 1/3, 2/3, 3. That's where my -4 is. So that's being scaled by thirds. This one's being scaled by fourths. So if I count backwards from -3, 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. This would be 4/4. 1, 2, 3. This would be 4. Does that make sense? All right. So either keep going or maybe pause the video. If you watched me do a few, then you should try a few on your own. So for fifths, I'm counting, oh, these are positive numbers, so I got to make sure that 6 is going to be on this side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I break it up into fifths, there's my 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I only have 2 numbers on that number line. And now I have sixths. And notice I'm starting with -100. And I'm going to count 1, 6, 2, 6, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oops, 6, 6 would be right there. And it's -101. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This would be -102. And then the tenths. Okay, so now I'm thinking, so tenths looks like this. Or I could even do decimals, right? Like each section could be 0.1. So I need to have 10 sections. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So my -14 would be here. And then I can show that oops, did I do that right? Oops, that's a +14. And then I could just show every other one. This is 14 1/10. This is 14 2/10. So I could write it like this. 14.2 is right there. And then this is 14.3. This is, oops, I'm skipping wrong. Let's see. 2, this would be 14.4, and this would be 14.6. And then this one is 14.8, because every single one of these marks represents 1/10. And the last one is 15. And then the last thing I have is 20ths. Can't really do 20ths as a decimal, but I can think of it as a fraction, 1/20, which means I need 20 spaces. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Uh-oh, I'm going to go off. So let's do this. Let's call these halfsies. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So you see what I did? I wanted to use one whole square for each of the 1/20ths, but I realized I didn't have enough. So I just cut each of the squares in half, and each of those half squares represents 1 1/20th. So 19 would be right here. if I scale my number line into 20ths. Okay. So now, here's the part of the lesson that gets a little bit tricky for students. But what I'm trying to do is on a number line, see, there's these two fractions are both between -1 and 0. So it's -1/3 and -2/3. And what I'm asking you to do is to find a number that's a fraction that's in between those two fractions. And if you're just thinking about fraction pieces, right? If I think about, here's 1/3, here's 2/3, I'm trying to picture something that is somewhere in between the size of this one piece and the size of these two pieces together. And so maybe you're thinking the easiest way to do that, right, is to cut each of these pieces into smaller pieces so that I can find a number in between. And so what we usually do is I'm going to kind of blow up the number line and show you that this would be 0 and this would be -1. And I'm going to go ahead and make the 1/3 and the 2/3 a little bit bigger on my number line. So you can see visually, right, there's space in between here. Now, I don't know what fraction goes in between here, but what I do know is I can change the thirds, right, if I cut them into smaller pieces by multiplying by a giant 1. So I'm going to take the 2/3. I'm just going to pretend it's not negative right now. And I'm going to multiply it by 2/2. There's my giant 1. I get 4/6. And when I take the 1/3 and I multiply it by a giant 1, I get 3/6. So now what you can see that I've done is I'm cutting the number line up, and I'm going to use a different color. I'm now cutting it up into different size pieces. And I'm telling you that the -1/3 is really the same as -2/6, and the -2/3 is the same as -4/6. And the reason I did that was because that I know that half of thirds are 6. So I'm going to put these little blue marks in between, and each of these blue marks are the 1/6 in my scale, kind of like we did in the warm-up. So can you see now that I've got a fraction that's right in the middle? And that fraction, if I count by 6, this is -1/6, -2/6, -3/6, -4/6, and -5/6. So now that I've cut these into smaller pieces, right, instead of the red, I now have the blue markings, and I can see that right in the middle, and it doesn't have to be right in the middle, but I notice right in the middle is -3/6. But then I go, wait a minute, -3/6 can be simplified, right? So I take the 3/6 and I divide it by 3/3 and I get 1/2. So the fraction that's right in between 2/3 and 1/3 is 1/2. Now I could make bigger pieces, right? I could have taken the 2/3 and I could have multiplied by 3/3 and gotten 6/9. I could take the 1/3 and multiply by 3/3 and I would get 3/9. So I'm just trying to give you some other ideas of if I take the 3/9 and the 6/9. So the 3/9 is here, -3/9. That makes this -6/9. So notice if I think about a pizza that's been cut into 9 pieces, what's in between these two numbers? Well, there's -4/9 and there's -5/9. So the smaller the size pieces, the more in between fractions that you can make. Okay, takes a little bit of practice. That's the first one with a fraction. That's the harder one, right? Decimals are a lot easier because it's a base 10 number system. Okay, so if I'm asking you to find a number that's between these two values, it helps if I blow up the number line and put a -2 here and put a -1 there. And then notice I've got a -1.5 and a -1.75. -1.5 I know is right in between the 1 and the 2, right? Because it's 1.5. So I put the -1.5 here, and then -7.5. Oh, I know where that is. It's like if I think about money, this is $1.50. This is $2, right? This is 3/4. This is 4. Let's see. This is 6/4. That's 8/4 right in between. I'm thinking about how many quarters I have, even though it's a negative number. I'm picturing the positives. Okay, So now I've got my number line. But one of the things I can do with decimals and with money is I don't have to find common denominators. I can actually think about it as the two decimal places. So I could add a 0 to this. And right now you can see I have $1.50 and $1.75. Pretend they're positives right now. And I have a lot of options in the middle, right? But I didn't want to really add the 0 and go into the hundreds yet. What I was thinking is, what if I count by 0.1 and I just break up my number line into tenths? Kind of like I did in the warm-up here where I did tenths, right? And every one of these spaces counted for 0.1. So if I make, let's see, this was fifths. So now I'm kind of going to be careful and I'm going to count. I need 1.4, 1.3, 1.2, and 1.1. I'm going to put my numbers up here so that you can see. This is negative 1.1. This is negative 1.3. There's negative 1.5. And then in this direction, I would have, trying to make my spacing evenly, but I didn't do a very good job, 1.6. So can you see already that this 1.6 is in between the two values that are on my number line? Okay, so as I mentioned, another way that I could do this was I could start turning all of my numbers into two decimal numbers and think about money. So this would be like $1. This would be $1.10, $1.30, $1.50. This would be $2 even though they're negatives. So this would be 1.60 in between. So I can find some other numbers in between by making even smaller decimal places. Okay, so now here's an OYO. So I want you to try this on your own, right? You're going to pause the video. But first, I'm going to go ahead and put this is negative 2.5. And again, the book has these negatives as examples, but you can think about them as positives, initially, just to help you get the idea. So you're going to try to find a number that's in between the two values. And remember that we want to find a common denominator or just make the denominator larger, but it has to be the same denominator to make just one measurement on my number line. So you're looking at halves and you're looking at thirds. And sometimes if you just go with the easiest thing, which would be sixes, there might not be enough numbers in the middle. So I suggest picking another multiple other than 6. That's my hint. Okay, go for it. So if I make a list of multiples of 2, I got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. And if I make a list of the multiples of 3, I've got 3, 6, 9, 12. So as I mentioned, if you change the denominators to sixes, there might not be a small enough denominator, a big enough denominator to have a bunch of fractions in between. So maybe I'm going to pick 12 to make sure that I've got small enough pieces that I've got some room in between my 2.5 and my 2 1/3. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply. So over on this side, I've got my negative 2 1/2, and I'm going to change the denominator to 12. So right now I have a 2, so that means I need to multiply by 6 over 6 is my giant 1. So now this fraction piece, remember I'm just multiplying, I'm thinking about the fraction piece, not the whole number. The whole number stays the same. And then I end up with 6/12. So that means I'm going to cut up this number line into 12s, right? So I'm going to put in blue under here. This is negative. Oops, I made my numbers wrong. Sorry about that. You might have to erase yours. This is supposed to be my number line, -3 and -2. And then the number that I just made was 2 and 6/12, which is 2 1/2, which is right in between -2 and 3. So this is where -2 and 6/12 would be living. Let's go ahead and erase that mistake that I made. Sorry about that. And then the other fraction is negative 2 1/3. So I'm going to take negative 2 1/3, and I'm going to multiply that by 4 because I want the denominator to also be 12ths. And I get negative 2 4/12. So there's where my 6/12 are. So now I'm going to be careful, and I know I need to put, let's see how many, I need 12ths all along here. So this section has to have 6, which means I need to make 5 evenly spaced marks next to this one. Let's see how well I do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Not bad. So every one of these marks are 12ths. So if I'm trying to find negative 2 4/12, here's the 6/12, the 5/12, the 4/12 is here. So right here is negative 2 4/12. Okay, so can you see, here's my negative 2 4/12, here's my negative 2 6/12. I have exactly one fraction that's in between, and that is negative 2 5/12. So if I made the denominators to be 6s with the 2 and the 3, I wouldn't have enough space in between. As it was, I barely made enough room for the fractions. So I want to pick a denominator that's big enough to give me space in between, but that's not so big that it's not fun to make those number lines. All right, that's on your own for the fraction. Now let's look at the other thing that you'll be seeing, which is just graphing negative fractions and decimals. And so for some of the homework, you'll see graph each number and its opposite. So remember that when we're graphing an opposite, I always start with 0 somewhere in the middle. It doesn't have to be exactly in the middle, but somewhere in the middle I start with 0, and then I pay attention to the denominator, and the denominators are fourths. So it makes sense to count by 1/4 in this example. So this will be 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. And then, of course, 4/4 is just the same thing as 1. And then I go in the opposite direction because I'm also going to have to graph the negative numbers. And it is hard sometimes to fit all the negative numbers in. So remember, now all I've done is made a number line. I have to put a closed circle at positive 3/4 and a closed circle at negative 3/4. Now I've graphed those two. Now we're going to do the same thing with the decimal, and notice this is counting by tenths. So I'm going to start with my 0 in the middle. Now I don't have 10 spaces, right? So I really can't count each one of these as a tenth. So I have to be strategic about it, and I know I have to go to 1.6. So what I'm thinking is, I'm picturing two whole numbers, and I'm picturing this number is between a negative 2 and a negative 1. So I know I have to have a negative 2 on the left side and a positive 2 on the right side. So it might make sense to skip this and call this 1, and skip the space and call this 2. So this would be negative 1, this would be negative 2, and now I can put the negative 1.6. I'm kind of estimating. So this is, so each of these scales is a half. There's a negative 1/2. There's negative 1, negative 1.5. So negative 1.6 would be a little there because negative 1.5 is right there. So this is where negative 1.6 is. And I put my closed circle, and then I go in the opposite direction to the positive side. This is where my positive 1.5 would be. So I know the 1.6 would be about there. Okay, so now you're going to try some OYOs. Okay, so there's 4 OYOs here. There's 2 decimals and 2 fractions. So I'm asking you to graph the number and its opposite. So I'm going to have you pause the video. This is the last part of the notes, and then you can start on homework. So I'm going to make this number 1, and I'm going to notice that I'm graphing 2.5. So I know I need to have room on either end, so it might make sense for me to put 0 in the middle. 1, 2, oh, this will work out just perfectly. So I got, this will be 1, this will be 2, 3 will be right there. Then I have negative 1, negative 2, and right there is my negative 3. So 2.5, right? Each of these stands for a half. So there's 1.5. Right here is where 2.5 is. I'm going to go ahead and label it. And then I need to graph the opposite, which is on the other side, right? Equal distance from 0 over in this direction. This is where my negative 2 and 1/2 is. So I made 1/2 be my scale. All right, so number 2, I've got negative 4/5 and its opposite. So I'm going to need fifths on my number line. So it might make sense to put 0 here and make sure I have enough to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5/5 is 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5/5 in this direction is negative 1. So if I start with my negative 4/5, I count backwards. 1, 2, 3, 4. The denominator counts how many? This is where negative 4/5 is. And then I could add a negative 2/5 just to show a few more numbers. And then in this direction, this is positive 2/5. And this is where positive 4/5 is. Okay, decimals. Notice number 3 has 1 decimal place and number 4 has 2 decimal places. So let's go ahead and start this with a 0. I know I'm picturing this in between 3 and 4, right? So I know I'm going to want to have a negative 4. I probably want to go at least out to negative 4. So maybe I'll make each one of these be a 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is where my negative 4 is. This is where my negative 3 is. I know that negative 3.5 is right in between them. So I can just go that and do negative 3.5. And then maybe for good measure, maybe I can show you that this is where negative 1 is and that this is negative 1.5, just so that you know that I know how to number a number line correctly. And then in this direction, here's my positive 1, there's my 3, there's my 4, my positive 3.5 is right between 3 and 4. All right, the last one, we need 100ths on our scale, really. Or I guess we could think of them as quarters, right? So let's do this. Let's put a 0 here. Okay, so because I have this whole number 5, if it was just 0.25, I could count by fourths, but I can't because I need to be all the way up to 5. So somewhere this number is in between 5 and 6. So what I could do is I could just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This will be my 5. And then the 0.25, if I think about this as money, right? This is $5.00. And this at the end here is $6. So $5.25, it's not halfway, it's about a fourth of the way, right? Because it's 1/4. So I can put my dot right there and count that as 5.25. And then in the opposite direction, I'm going to do the same thing. And maybe I just want to put a few more numbers on my number line so people can get an idea of my scale. I'm counting by ones. So if I'm trying to draw 1/4 past the negative 5, I'm going to show where my negative 6 is. I'm going to picture this would be 5.5, and then half of 5.5, half of the 0.5 is 0.25. There's the bell. I almost got done. Negative 5.25 is right there. Okay, so the homework is a worksheet that you're going to glue into your math notebook, and there's 5 problems on it. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and the 5th one involves a little bit of a finding which one is false. So remember, when you're finding fractions in between, you want to make common denominators, so you're cutting the fractions into smaller pieces. And then for number 5, you're trying to pick which statement is not true, and I'm asking you to explain your choice, but you could also maybe make a number line and demonstrate your evidence. Okay, good luck with homework.